Hey, and welcome back to another video from my Strange Phones playlist, the playlist of videos where I showcase mobile devices with strange or unusual features and designs, and basically devices that are unusual when compared to the other run-of-the-mill devices on the market. And we also go into the engineering details and design characteristics of these devices and why engineers and designers chose these designs or features for these specific phones, and of course how these designs or features affect the user on a day-to-day basis. And what we have here today is a phone that I've been wanting to review for many years. It has been long awaited on this channel. A lot of people have asked me, and finally we have one in hand. These things are quite rare in good condition, and when they are in good condition they're extremely expensive, or when they're cheap they come in really bad shape. But this one is in excellent shape and works just fine, and I got it for a really good price. And this is basically the Sony Xperia Z Ultra from 2013, which, if you know anything about phones, you'd know that this is the world's first true phablet. When this thing was released around July of 2013, people were not really sure as to what on earth this thing is. Is it a phone? Is it a tablet? It is a phone, but it's huge. So it is the first device that got the term phablet. And it basically revolutionized the term phablet alongside the Lumia 1520 over there. But that came a few months later after this, around October, where this thing had already set the gold standard for what would become a phablet at this massive size. And in this video, we'll be going over all the details on this phone and why the engineers chose this huge design and how it affected a user on a day-to-day basis. So here is the 2013 Sony Xperia Z Ultra here in 2023. So as always, before jumping right in, don't forget to smash that like button down below as it helps this video get on YouTube's algorithm. And also don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below and ring that bell notification button so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Also, if you have any questions or comments regarding the Xperia Z Ultra, don't forget to leave them down in the comment section below. We can start a discussion or I can answer your questions. My social media is also linked down in the description below, which includes Instagram, Discord, and Twitter. And now let's jump right into this video. So I got this phone for the price on screen here. As you can see, I can't remember exactly how much this was, about $30 or something. These usually go for an excess of $100 if they're in this condition, in good shape, without any damages or what. They usually go, they sometimes go for 50 and below, but then the screen's cracked, parts are missing, etc, etc. This one is in excellent shape. It's only missing this one flap from the top of the USB port over there, the micro USB port, but everything else works perfectly on this phone. The only downside is it is locked to the previous owner's account, but that's easy to bypass. I'll just go ahead and flash this thing and we can easily get rid of the previous owner's information, basically bypass the lock screen. So as usual with these videos, we'll be going into all the history details of this phone, basically discussing the history on the Xperia Z Ultra, and then only we'll be jumping, there we go, that's a classic Sony startup sound. So we'll be basically going into all the details on this phone after I've basically spoken about the history on the device. So if you don't want to hear all the history and all the other stuff, jump to the segmented section on the segmented slider bar, jump straight into the design analysis discussion which I will have. But now firstly, let's go unlock this thing by flashing its OS using a flash tool, and then let's jump into the history section. So of course we're going to flash this thing, and we have to use the Sony Mobile Flasher by Androxyde. Of course you can't use the official Sony flasher because the phone is locked. It'll give you an error when you try and flash it with that. So you have to use this. It's available online on Androxyde's website. And basically what you do is you go ahead and you plug this thing in flash mode by basically power the phone off, hold the volume button down. So volume down, meaning lower volume down, and plug the phone in while holding volume down, and it should go into flash mode. Then download your flash file for whichever device you have, your region, etc, etc. And there are a few steps you have to follow to flash the phone. It's pretty straightforward. So let me do that and be right back. All right, so this thing is basically good to go. As you can see, I installed a fresh version of Android 5.1.1 Lollipop, and as you can see, this is your good old Timescape UI, Sony Timescape on top of Android 5.1.1 Lollipop. And yeah, that brings back a lot of memories, good old days of Sony when they were actually popular and really good. So let us now jump into some history now. This thing is basically a blown up version of the highly popular Xperia Z, which the Xperia Z was basically the sole device that single-handedly popularized water resistance in smartphones. It's not the first smartphone that was water resistant. A lot of people get that confused. That's the Motorola D5 from, I believe, 2010. I'll put it up there if it's not 2010. I actually covered that phone in a video, but the Motorola D5 wasn't that popular. But then the Xperia Z came in 2013, and it popularized the basically the water resistant market for phones, and that forced all the other manufacturers to make their phones water resistant. And we single-handedly owe it to the Xperia Z and Sony for making what is today water resistant devices popular. So big thumbs up to Sony for that. And this is basically a blown up Xperia Z. I do have an Xperia Z, but I cannot find it now after moving it somewhere in a box. I'll bring it out maybe later, but I've already covered it on this channel. This thing is basically a larger Xperia Z with a few differences as well. So the Xperia Z was released on February 9th of 2013, and this thing was released in July of 2013, the 24th of July actually, as I remember. It was first released, I believe, in India. It was released in India on the 24th of July of 2013 as the world's first true phablet device, and it definitely caught everyone by storm with this massive size, and people weren't really sure what to call it, and the word was going around that it was going to be called a phablet. And I'm not sure if Sony called it a phablet or people started calling it a phablet. I can't remember, but I think it was a more social thing that was on social media. People called it a phablet, and it's not what Sony called it on their advertising and stuff like that. So that's where it got its name. It's most likely people that called it, the consumers that called it a phablet device. However, when Sony marketed this thing, it was marketed as the world's slimmest full HD phone, because this thing was also easily one of the slimmest phones at the time, and this will go into the specs in a bit. This thing actually was easily up there in the top 5 of slimmest phones out there at only 6.5 millimeters. That is only 6.5 millimeters thick. So easily one of the slimmest phones at the time. There are phones that were slightly slimmer, but this thing was marketed as the first, or the world's slimmest full HD phone, because the phones that were slimmer than this were not full HD, and this thing had a full HD 1080p display. And it also is the world's first phone that allows users to take notes or draw using a regular pen. I'm not kidding, you can actually use a regular pen or pencil on this display. A lot of people don't know that, even though they advertise it, and I'll just prove that to you right now. So here we have a pencil, just a standard pencil. It is not a stylus or anything meant for touchscreens. There you go. A lot of people don't know this. As you can see, it doesn't work perfectly, but it works somewhat. So let me actually grab my iPhone 12 Pro Max here, and let me actually bring it up front here, and as you can see, that doesn't work. The screen protector makes no difference. As you can see, that's not going to work. But there were some phones at the time that you can actually use standard pens and pencils, and this is the world's first phone that could actually do that. And as you can see, it works just fine. Of course, it's not perfect. Sometimes it gets a bit touchy, but you can also use a pen. Let me use the point. Don't worry, it's not going to scratch the screen. It's just going to leave some ink marks. But as you can see, oh, this one doesn't want to work. That's strange. This one doesn't want to work. Actually, there's another pen. Let me grab that. All right, here we are. So this one, I remember the other day. There we go. This one works, and that one leaves like ink smudges. As you can see, it actually writes on the screen. Now I'll wipe that off, so don't panic that I'm ruining the screen. But I think the difference is that this pen doesn't work. So it needs the ink to actually register on the screen. So this one is writing on the screen, that's why it registers, but this one, the pen doesn't work, that's why it doesn't work. So yeah, that's a fun fact that not a lot of people know. You can actually use pens and pencils on this screen, and it's the first to actually do so. And of course, just like the Xperia Z, it was also water resistant. It had a IP55 rating up to 1.5 meters of water for 30 minutes. And it is also at the time the world's first thin phone that was IP certified. Most of the other IP certified phones were quite larger and thicker, so it's actually the world's first thin phone that was IP certified, or the world's thinnest phone at the time that was IP certified, because the thinner phones were not IP certified. But to get that water resistance, you actually had to cover all these flaps really tightly for them to actually work. The ports themselves were not water resistant. You had to just cover these flaps properly to get water resistance. Modern phones, the ports themselves are water resistant, they're sealed off, but these you had to actually just cover the flaps up, and if you broke the flaps like this, the phone loses its IP rating, of course. So yeah. And of course, in terms of software updates, this thing originally shipped with 4.2.2 Jelly Bean, then it got 4.3 Jelly Bean, and then for its second major update, it got 4.4.2 KitKat, and then 5.0 Lollipop, and then finally 5.1.1 Lollipop. But you could of course add custom ROMs and stuff from third-party websites like XDA forums, etc, etc. So that was just a quick, well, not really a quick, but a history rundown on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. There's just so much to talk about this phone, and I'll cover all of that in the full retro style review that I'll definitely do on this phone in a few weeks time. So definitely stay tuned for that by smashing that subscribe button down below. So now let us actually jump into discussing the design characteristics of this massive phone, or phablet. Now, firstly, to run some numbers, let me give you a full basically dimension spec rundown of this thing. So it is 175 millimeters tall, like that, 175 millimeters tall, that is 6.9 inches. It's 92 millimeters wide, or 3.6 inches wide, and 6.5 millimeters thin, or 0.26 inches thin. It weighs 212 grams. It wasn't at all heavy at the time. It was really light for its size. And in terms of its display size, it actually has a 6.44 inch display, a full 1080p display, 920 by 1080 at 342 pixels per inch. Easily one of the, if not the largest display at the time in a phone. But now let me actually pull up GSM Arena, and I'm going to say that for its time, it was the largest, or not for its time only. Well, actually, let me correct that. For its time, it was the largest phone, and largest phone period, for a long time. All phones that actually beat it in this size were those obscure brands like Doogee, Ulefone, and all. They made bigger phones, and then I think eventually that gaming phone, what is it called, Xiaomi Black Shark 3, I think the Black Shark 3 Pro beat it in terms of size. But the Black Shark 3 Pro was released many years later, but for a very long time this was the world's largest phablet, or world's largest phone, whatever you want to call it. So actually, let us pull up GSM Arena here and go into their advanced search, and as you can see, I've put height and width to max, so above 80 millimeters in width and above 175 millimeters in height, but I have not edited the year. So we have 40 results here, and as you can see, these more modern phones, you get Ulefone devices. There's the Z Ultra, Huawei Honor 8X, blah 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 blah, all relatively modern phones. This is actually a tablet, that's not a phone. So all of these are relatively modern phones. The Lenovo Fab 2, this one's a bit older but still not as old as that, and the Blackview BL 8800, more modern phones. However, if you go back and you start messing with the years and you go to 2013, you get only one result, and that is the Xperia Z Ultra. This thing was the largest phone at the time when released, and as you can see, GSM Arena has a great catalog of all the devices at the time. So as you can see, with that year setting to 2013 and that size setting, it was easily the largest phone at the time. There were full-on tablets that were bigger than it, but as a phone that fits in your pocket, this thing was easily the largest. So to answer the question, why is this thing so huge and out of proportion for its time? Well, it's kind of obvious. It is meant for consuming content. It is a true multimedia device. It has a massive battery. It's about 3030 milliamp hours, as I remember. Yeah, 3050 milliamp hours. And for that time, that was huge. The Xperia Z, the standard Xperia Z, only had 2330, and that was also quite a lot for the time. But 3050, that was a lot. So that powered this massive phone for hours and hours and hours. And this display actually has a few tweaks over the Xperia Z to look a bit better, even though the pixel density of this thing is lower than the Xperia Z's. So this thing's pixel density is around 344 pixels per inch. The Xperia Z was 441 pixels per inch. But this thing looks a bit better than the Xperia Z because it had a few tweaks to look a bit better at this size, even though it was not as sharp as the Xperia Z. And it's above that sweet spot 321 pixels per inch, with the iPhone 4, that whole argument that the human eye can't differentiate more than 321 pixels per inch. This thing is plenty higher than that. So it does look a bit better than the Xperia Z's display, but it also could be just that it's much bigger. So this thing was purposely built for consuming content with a considerably larger display. That's its main purpose. Of course, it had a few drawbacks when compared to the Xperia Z. It has a I wouldn't say quite, but a somewhat inferior camera setup. The Xperia Z was known for its 13.1 megapixel camera with a flash and all of that. This thing has only an 8 megapixel camera and has no flash, as you can see, so it kind of cut down on the camera there, but it still took really good photos. It was a Sony camera after all. It still beat out a lot of the competition in terms of photography, and it had a few upgrades over the Xperia Z as well. The Xperia Z had a plastic frame. This thing has a aluminum frame, apart from the plastic flaps on the side, of course, but this thing has an aluminum frame, so it feels much better than the Xperia Z. So the camera was the only downside, but in terms of display and build quality, it was better than the Xperia Z. And of course, the battery and the display, kind of obvious, it was considerably better than the Xperia Z. If you wanted a better experience in terms of consuming multimedia, you definitely went for this. Of course, this size could also be a hindrance if you want to fit it in your pockets. If you're a lady and you had your handbag or purse on you, this thing would fit, and it would be much easier to carry it around. But you probably wanted to have sizable pockets or a jacket pocket to put this in, because it is huge. Here's a Motorola Zybo tablet to compare. This is quite a large tablet, but this one's a prototype, but it's still the same size as the final model. As you can see, a full-fledged tablet, an 8-inch tablet with an 8-inch display compared to the Xperia Z Ultra. But yeah, that was exactly why they chose this design characteristic. Just simple. It's just consuming more content on a bigger battery and a larger screen. Feels better. It's just premium overall. This is the definition of a premium mobile device, and Sony definitely struck the nail on this. There were almost no complaints about this device. It was a customer, the customers basically loved this. It was a customer pet. Everyone just loved it so much when they bought it. It almost did not have negative reviews whatsoever. Easily one of the best phones of 2013. Of course, we also have to point out the Nokia Lumia 1520, which is a great phone with a great display, better camera than, of course, the Xperia Z and the Xperia Z Ultra. It had a better camera, but it wasn't as big, as you can see, and it came out in October of 2013, somewhat smaller. But when you hold them side by side, the 1520 kind of looks small, actually, in the face of this massive thing. So yeah, that was just a quick discussion as to why they chose this design characteristic. It's simple, just massive phone, better overall, feels better, great for consuming content on the go with your large battery and large display. Overall, one of my most favorite Sony devices ever, probably actually my favorite Sony device ever. I am actually debating between the Xperia S with that nice light bar versus this, but most likely it is this, the Xperia Z Ultra, and I'm happy to have one in good condition for quite a decent price, because these were quite expensive if you wanted one in good condition. If you find one for below $50 with a few cracks and all, that's definitely worth it, because these go for in excess of $100 in this condition. This missing flap is no big deal. This thing, it's easy. They're easy to flash, by the way. You can download the flash tool by Androxyde, as you saw there. and basically flash this thing. You don't have to do any funky driver things or anything like that. You can flash it with basically, if you have a Windows 10 or 11 computer, you can flash it. Also Windows 7, of course. You can easily flash these things and you're good to go. So definitely, if you have the opportunity, you should get your hands on one. If you're a collector, this is a must-have, and it's also somewhat of a vintage device, vintage-ish, because it's past the 10-year mark as of 2023. So yeah, this was the strange phones video on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra, and we discussed why this massive phone was a thing and how it affected the user on a day-to-day basis. It was just basically for multimedia consumption and so on. And as usual, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you honestly did, don't forget to smash that like button down below, as it helps this video get on YouTube's algorithm. And also don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below and ring that bell notification button so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Stay tuned for the full retro style review video on this phone, the ringtones video, and so on. And we'll of course be jumping into some shorts videos on this phone as well. So definitely stay tuned by subscribing, and also hit that bell notification button so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. If you have any questions or comments, don't forget to leave them down in the comment section below. We can start a discussion, or I can answer your questions. My social media is linked down in the description below, which includes Instagram, Discord, and Twitter. Thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in my next video.